Welcome, everyone, and thanks for coming to this session. It is being recorded. My name is Mike DeCesar. I'm on the AAUP's national staff. I'm in the Department of Academic Freedom, Tenure, and Governance. We are the policy wing of the association. So you're among the first people to see the new edition of this and hold it and cheer for it. I still have the old version, and we'll be referencing this more than this, but this becomes available to the public April 22nd, I think, on Johns Hopkins University Press's website. I think the paperback is $45 and the hardcover is 60, I think. So that's something to look forward to over the next couple of weeks. What I'm going to do today is talk about the essential policies that you should be getting into your faculty handbooks, collective bargaining agreements, other institutional governance documents if they're not already there. And the way I'm going to do it is totally contrary to what I used to do in my former life as a faculty member, which is when I would teach, I would be all over the classroom. I need to move and walk around and gesticulate, but I have to stand here for this. So just please bear with me. It's very unnatural for me. So I'll just spend like one slide on the role of an AUP chapter, a second slide on policy documents and reports, or what we affectionately call the Red Book, and then the bulk of the presentation will cover what we consider to be the 4 essential policy documents. If nothing else goes in your handbook, it should be stuff from these 4. The 1940 Statement of Principles on Academic Freedom and Tenure, which is our foundational policy document, the Statement on Government of Colleges and Universities, the AUP's recommended institutional regulations on academic freedom and tenure, and standards on renewal or non-renewal of faculty appointments. And I'll go into some detail with all 4 of those. So first, I mean, the essential role, the most significant role an AUP chapter has to play on campus is, as the introduction to the previous edition says, it's to work in collaboration with the Faculty Senate or other institutional governance bodies to try and get the institution to adopt AUP policy. This is, I mean, what's in here is the gold standard when it comes to policy, whether it's a dismissal policy, a suspension policy, a non-reappointment policy, anything you can imagine related to faculty life. There's probably a statement or report in here about that. And even if it's not in here, it may exist on our website or in an archive somewhere. This is not a collection of every single policy statement that's ever been produced over the last 110 years. It's the most important ones. So the chapter's main purpose, really, I mean, it has several purposes, but the main one is as the local embodiment of the national organization, its job is to promote the mission, the standards that characterize the AUP and always have. So the Red Book, this previous edition, had just over 80 of the most important policy documents in it, statements and reports. The new edition is a bit thinner. We could do a whole nother session on how this thing gets edited and how statements come in and out of this, but if you're interested, happy to talk about it afterward. Sections on academic freedom, tenure, and due process, academic governance, professional ethics, budgets, collective bargaining, salary and benefits, the work life of faculty members. Like I said, pretty much anything that's part of your job as faculty members, the AUP has had something to say about it since 1915. Of all the documents that are in this compendium, like I said, these 4 are the most significant ones. They're the ones that really need to be reflected in the handbook in terms of being able to safeguard academic freedom, tenure, and the faculty's role in institutional decision-making. They're essential. And what I'll do is try and explain what parts of each one are the most important to incorporate. So the 1940 Statement of Principles, it is the foundational policy document of the AUP. The founding document, the 1915 Declaration of Principles on Academic Freedom and Academic Tenure, is a different thing. It's much longer. Over the course of, those 25 years between 1915 and 1940, those principles from the 1915 Declaration were distilled into this really succinct, beautiful statement of principles on academic freedom and tenure. One of the reasons we consider it the foundational document is because it was jointly formulated by the AAUP and what's now the American Association of Colleges and Universities. So it represents a joint understanding at that time between the faculty writ large and presidents, college and university presidents, as represented by the AAC&U. And that was a really big thing, and it continues to be. That's why every time we write a letter, when our department opens a case by writing a letter to an institution's president about an apparent departure from our standards, every time it's about academic freedom and tenure, we reference the 1940 statement. Another reason it's important is because, every single policy document about academic freedom and tenure that came after it derives directly from it. And I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So this is good stuff to have directly from the 1940 statement in your handbook. This is all from the preamble to the statement. Which summarizes the argument for tenure. The common good depends upon the free, search for truth, right? And search for knowledge. And the free search for truth and knowledge depends upon your having academic freedom. And your having academic freedom is secured by having tenure. It's a pretty straightforward line of reasoning. And that's essentially what this says. That last quote, "the tenure is a means to certain ends," you might find that contradictory to the way we think about tenure now. The way we think about tenure now, and have for some decades, is as an end in itself. It was never conceived by the AUP as an end. It was a means to two ends. As it says, freedom of teaching and research and extramural activities, and a sufficient degree of economic security to make the profession attractive to individuals of ability. That's it. Tenure was never conceived as some kind of gold star for being an excellent teacher or productive scholar or, serving on every committee on campus. That is not what it was intended to do. It was intended to secure academic freedom. The 1940 statement goes on to elaborate on those three areas in which faculty have academic freedom. First, it says teachers are entitled to full freedom in research and the publication of the results. That second part's important. We just think, well, it's the freedom to do research. It's also the freedom to publish the results of that research. And we've seen more than one complaint come our way just in my 3.5 years on the staff, where someone has said, my administration said it was okay to do the research, but they're not letting me publish it. Well, that's a violation of academic freedom. Teachers are also entitled to freedom in the classroom in discussing their subjects. And then finally, college and university teachers are citizens, members of a learned profession, sorry for the missing A, and officers of an educational institution. When they speak or write as citizens, they should be free from institutional censorship or discipline. You're reading this closely and you're thinking, wait a minute, something is missing here. Where's that fourth pillar of academic freedom? What we call intramural speech or intramural expression. The 1940 statement actually doesn't explicitly say anything about the faculty's right to criticize institutional policy, for example. So you fast forward several decades, and as the organization tried to work that out and make it more explicit, it turns out that the most explicit statement of academic freedom covering intramural expression is in a report called Protecting an Independent Faculty Voice, which is in here. Academic Freedom after the Garcetti v. Ceballos Supreme Court decision. We developed a report, and in that report, the authors thought it was important to outline what what exactly the parameters of intramural speech were. And that report produces, I think, 3 different examples of language that you can literally copy and paste into your handbook. And this is just one of those 3 examples. Freedom to teach, both in and outside the classroom, conduct research and publish the results, and to address any matter of institutional policy or action, whether or not as a member of an agency of institutional governance. You don't have to be a faculty senator to have the freedom to criticize an institutional policy. You don't even need to serve on a committee. You're just a rank and file faculty member. You have that right. And then the last sentence, of course, is about extramural expression, freedom to address the larger community, etc. The section of the 1940 Statement on Academic Tenure is arguably the most significant because it sets forth very clearly what tenure is by the AUP standard and what tenure means. And this is a lot of words, and there are going to be a lot of words on subsequent slides too. What it boils down to is this. If you've held a full-time position consecutively for 7 years at an institution, you have tenure. Even if your institution doesn't have a formal tenure system, under AAUP standards, you have tenure after 7 years of continuous full-time service. I don't care what rank you're at or what the title is called, what the position is called. If you're there for more than 7 full-time years continuously, you have tenure. Okay, that sounds great, but what does it mean? What it means is that you're also entitled to all the due process protections that attach to having a formally tenured position. And I'll have much more to say about that as we go along. So here it is. After the expiration of a probationary period, which should not exceed 7 years, faculty members should have permanent or continuous tenure, which means their service should be terminated only for adequate cause, and according to the due process procedures that I'll outline a bit later. The probationary period should not exceed 7, termination for cause of a continuous appointment, or the dismissal for cause prior to the expiration of a term appointment, in other words, a probationary faculty member, should, if possible, be considered by both the faculty committee and the governing board in a hearing of record. In that hearing of record, critically, as I'll say again later, the burden of proof is on the administration for why it has taken the action against that faculty member. That's a critical part of the due process safeguards that the AUP has stood for all these years. 85 years now since the 1940 statement. Okay, so why should it be in handbooks if it hasn't been clear already? It provides authoritative definitions of the key principles that govern your work lives for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, however long you're at the institution. That's important in and of itself. It also provides definitions that the institution itself has agreed upon. If it's in the handbook, that means the administration and board have at least tacitly approved of that stuff, if not endorsed it outright. It recognizes the authority of the association on these matters, of course. And to go back to something I just touched on earlier, having the 1940 statement in there implies that other AAUP standards are applicable, because all those other policy standards that came after 1940 related to academic freedom and tenure derive from the 1940 Statement of Principles. How do we put it in there? These are rank ordered from most preferential to least preferential. By far, we want to get it all in there. The 1940 statement with the 1970 interpretive comments, the endorsement of the governing board explicitly, that's ideal. It's also extremely rare. Get it there in full with at least endorsement by the institution, that's more common. If not that, then get the preamble, which was a couple slides ago, and the section on academic freedom. If you can't get both of those, at least get the preamble. If not even the preamble, then at least the section on academic freedom. And these are very short sections too, like a couple paragraphs, short paragraphs. And if worse comes to worse, just by reference. What it does, among other things, just in terms of like the work my colleagues and I do in our department, when it's in there, when something is in there from the 1940 statement and we have to open a case on a campus, we can then say in our letter, we're pleased to note that your faculty handbook explicitly says the 1940 statement is important. So why are you behaving this way in contravention of the standards that it sets forth? Yeah, well, administrators especially like to interpret them to suit their own purposes. So that's where we come in too. If you see that happening on campus, please do contact us. We're happy to correct them. I should stop here. Are the questions so far? And please feel free to just ask questions as I go. Please.
I mean, UConn has, obviously CDA and uh, some of the things on like academic freedom have traditionally been in the bylaws, and they did include that. However, that is something that the university board of trustees can update, and not always. Uh, I don't want to be a little careful how I praise that, and they could take it out potentially. So the idea is maybe it should be in a contract instead. So I just wondered if because you have consistently mentioned faculty handbooks, but is it is it possible to get it in a collective bargaining agreement? Is that stronger?
Absolutely, it's stronger. I mean, to get this stuff in a CBA is much more ironclad than to get it in a faculty handbook. And so thanks for that. It's a really important question. And I should be saying faculty handbooks and collective bargaining agreements, most definitely. Any institutional governing document you can get this stuff into, get it in there. Even if it's across 3 different documents, get it in all of them. Because even if the board decides to unilaterally remove it from the bylaws, it's still in the handbook. It's still in the contract. So that covers you. And really, the CBA is more ironclad, but historically, courts have wanted to see administrations adhere to what's in their own faculty handbooks. It's not as ironclad, but it's the best protection that you have. Those of you who are in advocacy chapters, like I was for most of my career. Please.
I just had a question about interpretations, sort of often Gary's a comment. We're sort of being told that the way to read policy documents is by not what is written, but by what is not barred. And so I wanted to have your, opinion on that.
Um, it makes I'll just be honest, yeah, it makes absolutely no sense to me. As a person who lives with this, literally, like, I use this every day. These policy documents weren't put together like slapdash overnight and just, like, thrown in here. Um, Most of them were part of a deliberative process that involved members on standing committees in corroboration with the staff who has the knowledge of the history of these policy documents. A lot of them went out for public comment to the profession before they were finalized. There's a lengthy process to producing things that end up in here. So to be told that you shouldn't actually read it for what it says, but for what barred, what it doesn't ban, that, um, my brain just doesn't.
Just so it's like I don't necessarily understand how what do we do in a scenario where they're telling us that we don't.
I guess that's the point we're at now as a country generally. I think it would depend on the situation, but our department could probably advise you. If there was a specific, like if they were holding up a specific policy document, like the 1940 statement and saying, see this? It doesn't say what you think it says. Here's what it actually says. Write to us and say, can you help us figure out what this, and that's part of what we do. Yeah. At the very least, in situations like that, we'll write what we call an advisory letter. If it's requested by the chapter or the Senate, or ideally both, um, we'll write an advisory letter that says, here's what the statement says. Here's what the standards are. We really don't care how the administration talks about. Here's what they are. And then we encourage you to share that letter widely, including with the administration, the governing board, press, if you like. So the 1940 statement is just one of my favorites. The statement on government is another one. This does for academic governance what the 1940 statement does for academic freedom and tenure. It's the cornerstone, and it has been now since the late 60s, the mid to late 60s. So we're coming up on 60 years of this document's existence. This was also a joint formulation, this time with the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges, which obviously represents governing boards, trustees, and the American Council on Education, which of course represents presidents. As recently as 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that now, the AGB's governing board put out a white paper reaffirming the importance of having the principles in the Statement on Government of Colleges and Universities be the basis for faculty handbooks and CBAs, the governance sections of those. The AGB and ACE didn't endorse the statement like the AAUP did, but it commended it to their members. And it's quoted or referenced in hundreds, maybe over 1,000 handbooks and CBAs that are out there. What's so brilliant about this statement is really two things. First, it sets out like general principles of academic government, or what we now call shared governance. I'm using air quotes, and it's in quotation marks up there, because that phrase never actually appears in the Statement on Government. It came somewhere after, out of thin air, apparently. My hunch is that some administrator came up with it as a way to try to dilute the idea, because if it's shared, then everybody's involved all the time and equal. That's not what it means. So it sets out these general principles first, like there's an inescapable interdependence among the components of the institution, primarily the board, the administration, through the president, and the faculty. Second, effective institutional decision-making requires adequate communication among these components and full opportunity for appropriate joint planning and effort. Adequate communication, inescapable interdependence, joint planning and effort. These are the conceptual bases for the Statement on Government. Then it gets into the nitty-gritty, which makes it even better. Before I get to the nitty-gritty, I should say, to go back to something I said maybe 30 seconds ago, shared governance is not the same as like democracy. It's not the same as stakeholder engagement or whatever other terms administrators like to come up with to refer to faculty. It's not everybody has an equal voice in every decision that gets made on this campus. That is not what academic governance is, according to the Statement on Government. What it is instead is what that paragraph says, or that sentence. Each component has different responsibilities based on their competencies and their knowledge and their skills. So for the governing board, they have final institutional authority in all matters. And I say that very uncomfortably in a room full of faculty members and as a former faculty member. I didn't like to hear it when I first heard it, and I don't like to say it, but it's true. The board has final institutional authority. But, it delegates that authority, the day-to-day administration of the operation of the institution, to the administration, primarily the president, and it delegates that authority in academic matters to the faculty. But. So, famously, for those of us who love AAUP policy, the faculty has primary responsibility for such fundamental areas as curriculum, subject matter and methods of instruction, faculty research, faculty status, and those aspects of student life which relate to the educational process, things like admission standards and graduation standards. I know we all have offices of admissions and registrar's offices. Those kinds of things are supposed to be the faculty's primary responsibility. Working with the staff in those offices, of course, but the faculty should establish what the admission standards are and graduation standards. And the reason is simple. Who has the collective expertise in these areas? Look at these areas. Curriculum, subject matter, how to teach, how to do research. The faculty has it. Nobody else does. Trustees don't. The president and all the vice presidents and senior vice presidents and executive vice, they don't. Please.
So this might be a little bit of a Wesleyan Pacific thing. It might apply to some other institutions. A common thing that we have received and we've pushed for matters of shared governance is that, according to our bylaws, the president of our university, and our provost and our deans are faculty members. So we are told that there is faculty input. These things when it's literally just administrators for doing that. And this has been kind of a wall that we've hit. How would you advise us to advocate for like broad faculty input and elected faculty input, because our deans are appointed, our provost is appointed, and they get very, very offended very quickly. Like we're trying to strip them of faculty status when they clearly have a primarily administrative.
That's what you just said at the end is the key. From the perspective of policy standards, we have this really good joint statement on faculty status of librarians. It's kind of a weird place to have the policy standard, but it's in there. And I can send it to you. Actually, I'm not familiar enough with the new edition yet and where everything is to find it quickly, but I can in my handy dandy old one. It's called the Joint Statement on Faculty Status of College and University Librarians. And the standard in there, I mean, it really boils down to you are not a faculty member just because you have faculty status.
Well,
You have to do the job of faculty members.
they have the ability to fire and hire. They have managerial roles, the provost there.
Exactly.
So that excludes them, and they aren't doing primarily teaching.
Exactly. How many courses does the president teach?
So you don't look at what their title is. You look at the actual job description. So how's the job description with a purpose?
Yeah, and what they actually do. I mean, if they're essentially doing faculty work, teaching, research, and service on committees, they're faculty members under our standards. If they are not doing that work, then they are not faculty members under our standards. Here we go. Neither administrative responsibilities nor professional degrees, titles, or skills per se qualify members of the academic community for faculty status. The function of the librarian as participant in the processes of teaching, research, and service is the essential criterion of faculty status. That's it in 2 sentences. Sorry, it took me a minute to find it. 211. Oh, this is the old edition, though. Okay. I'm going to miss this. I told my colleague Greg Schultz edited the new edition. And I said, I'm excited for it to come out, but I'm really going to miss this one because this is the one that I broke in on the staff. And so that's my problem, not yours. Exactly. Yeah. I don't want to see it go into a new edition for that reason. But so further, the ellipsis in the first sentence, the only thing that's missing from there is the words faculty status. The faculty also has primary responsibility for what the statement calls faculty status and related matters, which includes all of these things and more. Appointments, reappointments, decisions not to reappoint, the granting of tenure, promotions, dismissal, post-tenure review. The faculty should control those processes and those decisions. Even though the board is the ultimate institutional authority, including in these areas, the statement says this, that the board and administration should concur with faculty judgment in all of those areas on the previous slide, except in rare instances and for compelling reasons stated in detail. The statement actually says the same thing twice. It says it there, and then it also says, on these matters, the power of review or final decision lodged in the governing board or delegated by it to the president should be exercised adversely only in exceptional circumstances and for reasons communicated to the faculty. It's desirable that the faculty should, following such communication, have opportunity for further consideration and further transmittal of its views to the president or board. So, a faculty committee decides to recommend someone be granted tenure. The provost doesn't get to say, no, I don't think so. The president doesn't get to say, no, I don't think so. That kind of decision should be exercised only under exceptional circumstances, and then the faculty committee should have a chance to say, here's why you're wrong, and you need to give this person tenure. Again, who's in the best position to judge a candidate's qualifications in these areas of faculty status? Who should be appointed, not reappointed, dismissed, promoted, granted tenure? It's the faculty.
I just want to go back to one of the other slides. One more. So, we have this big argument at our university in terms of the faculty's primary responsibility is fundamentally the curriculum. So the dean will basically make us sit in meetings until we pass whatever program she wants to put forward, and says that it's our responsibility only for the curriculum, not whether or not it's, there's resources, there's faculty that can teach the class, that there's lab space, that it's a good market. And so she has really, and we have brought this to the provost, and we are going to try and redo our whole program selection process, but has narrowly interpreted that to the curriculum, not the establishment and the dissolution of programs, which I'm pretty clear in the red book. It says it's in our here.
Yeah, I want to come to that. Yeah. When it comes to program discontinuance or department discontinuance, the faculty needs to have a primary role in that under our standards.
The voice.
No.
The actual decision making though.
It means a committee of faculty that decide, they make the primary decision. They're primarily responsible for deciding whether a program should go away.
And this is the problem with the interpretation.
And not just discontinuance.
Responsible, Mary, for the syllabus, not for within this program.
Well, no, the dean needs to thumb through the rest of the red book then, because there's other stuff. And we'll come to it in the context of the recommended institutional regulations. It's regulation 4D on program discontinuance. I thought I saw another hand go up. Did I? No? Okay.
Yes, questions. With this idea that faculty are primarily responsible for the curriculum, and instruction and everything like that, and maybe programs and that. But then planning for the university, how many students we're going to accept, what buildings we should build next, how to outkeep budget.
That's administration.
So the faculty.
It should meaningfully involve the faculty. Everything you just said should meaningfully involve the faculty. Here's another sentence from the Statement on Government. Such matters as major changes in the size or composition of the student body, the relative emphasis to be given to the various elements of the educational research program should involve participation of governing board, administration, and faculty prior to final decision. Long-range planning. The Statement on Government talks about the faculty's role in long-range, what we now call strategic planning. In short, no major decision should be made at the institution without the faculty being involved in some way. If the decision's in one of these areas, the faculty should have the primary responsibility for the decision. If it's what kind of shrubs to plant outside the president's house, like, you're not experts in that, I don't think. Maybe one of you is or two of you. We don't really care about that. But like larger physical plant considerations, like we're going to put up a new building. How many labs should it have? How many classrooms should it have? How big should those spaces be? You're the ones who teach and do research in there. So of course you should be meaningfully involved in that. 118, bottom of the second column.
At our universities, faculty have no input at all into those concept decisions. Admin decides, what programs they're going to create and act. And like, I don't know. Well, with Christian, there's they'll appoint some person that they think approves and say this is the faculty input, and it's always the same people.
Yeah, you can't have faculty representation if they're an elector. That's another side.
So is
Yes.
it pretending that they have to be elected?
I mean, if they're going to represent the faculty, shouldn't the faculty elect them? Yeah. That is not in this red book. We do have a policy statement that talks about the need for faculty members to be elected. Yeah. And it's,
We can get a letter from you now.
oh, certainly. An advisory letter for sure. Absolutely.
Didn't
the former president who was at Fairfield, she was really big about that. Faculty.
Irene Mulvey?
Yeah, Irene. Yeah, she drilled that into it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, otherwise, it also goes into like confidentiality agreements that administrations like to make faculty members sign on certain committees. If you can't talk to the people who elected you, who you're supposed to be representing, because of some confidentiality agreement or NDA, how can you claim that you're representing anybody but yourself? Like it doesn't make logical sense, except maybe to certain administrators.
Can you explain a little bit about what's meant by appointments in this list? Does that mean about where hires are?
Or just like what faculty searches, like what was it your candidate choose?
Both. Anything related to the appointment of a faculty member, whether it's evaluating finalist credentials, whether it's participating in the search, whether it's recommending a finalist for the position, that should be the faculty's primary responsibility, again, based on your collective expertise.
So would it also include like if a certain unit or department is allowed to serve? Like, you know what I mean? Like determining the necessity of additional hires.
Yes, absolutely. You're talking about the educational function of the institution, right? And anything that has to do with the educational function of the institution, you should have primary responsibility for. Not a dean saying, well, that department's the lucky one this year. They get to hire, and you all are out in the cold. That is not how it's supposed to work.
And how do you advise when many of these types of goals have been kind of taken from the faculty? And then if you're trying to build true governance back in, the kind of, at least the avenue that we have been seeing is like, well, you can have a consultative goal or like the final decision of primary responsibility is still the provost and the deans and the president. But you can have you can make nice recommendations that we can abide by or not. Like me just ignore you. I'm just curious of like how you would advise to get true teeth and real power in a newest or reestablished
That's something that if after
I mean, beyond pointing to the policy standards, my department doesn't really do that stuff. That's more my colleagues in the organizing department. They can help you think about concrete ways for the faculty to act collectively on a campaign, a couple of campaigns to get things changed, get things done. It's it's not good enough for a dean to, well, you can have a seat at the table. The faculty has a seat at the table. I'm tired of hearing about a seat at the table. That doesn't mean that the faculty has their rightful role in the process because they have a seat at the table. That's a different thing altogether. And so, one of our internal policy documents on governance casework says that the best line of defense against the loss of shared governance is the local faculty, is the faculty on campus. If the faculty can't or won't act collectively to either stop the erosion or to try and take some of it back, there's nothing really we can do. Even our organizing department. I mean, it depends on the local faculty.
Is COG really careful about the policies and procedures, whether it's in your faculty handbook or in your manual academic policies, that, from the outset that the faculty are involved and they have a vote. And it's really hard because there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, and most of the time we're just giving a consultatory role. So blatantly pointing that out, and I think there's a PDF of a really nice survey that the AAU did in 2022.
Our research department, yeah.
Yeah, the research department, and showing them it actually describes what shared governance is and how people rate it around the country. So it's pretty eye-opening.
Yep. And on our website, there's also a shared governance assessment tool.
Yes.
You can sit with some of your colleagues and just kind of figure out how you stack up against the national results that came out in that study from a few years ago on everything from like your faculty's participation in selecting new faculty to participation in other things on campus. It's a pretty helpful tool.
And it is, and it's really eye-opening when you see that even in the basic things like starting programs, even like the MAP, in art we call it the MAP, the Manual to Academic Policies, even giving students grades.
I mean, it can get to a certain level and the dean can overturn your grade.
No, that's unacceptable under AAUP policy standards. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the idea for the chapter, to try and get this stuff, even if it's a seemingly small policy like the change of grade policy. It's one thing to work on. There's always something to work on in governance. That was my experience. I'm assuming it's yours as well. We have a statement, the assignment of course grades and student appeals. It does not involve any administrator. It involves faculty. The only body that can change a grade is a faculty committee once it gets to that point. But it's got to go through a whole bunch of other points first, and it never involves an administrative officer. To have something to work, that's something to try and get in there too. But maybe not as important as having sound dismissal procedures. And procedures around financial exigency, and as we've talked about already, the discontinuance of a program or department for educational reasons. The recommended institutional regulations on academic freedom and tenure have been continually revised in the decades since they were first developed. In fact, we just revised them again to 2023 to make a small but important change to the section on part-time faculty, the regulation on part-time faculty. There are 16 regulations in the current version of the recommended institutional regulations, and as the slide says, they're all most of them are critical, but the most critical are these three: regulations 5, 4C, and 4D that govern these respective matters. And I tried not to get too far into the weeds with these. There's just so much in each of these regulations in terms of detail about due process protections, and I love it. So I really tried to keep it on the fairway. So again, please just bear with me. Regulation 5 covers dismissal of a tenured faculty member for cause, or dismissal of a probationary faculty member before the end of their specified term. In other words, before they come up for renewal. That middle statement, I can't emphasize enough. If you don't have dismissal procedures at your institution, either in the CBA or the faculty handbook, that are close to ours in essential respects, you don't have tenure at your institution. You may have it, but it's in name only. And we see this more commonly than people might realize, where there's a tenured faculty member who's been at the institution for 20 years and suddenly they get a dismissal notice because of a student complaint. And we write to them and they say, well, here's what you're entitled to in terms of due process as a tenured member of the faculty, somebody who's been there for more than 7 years of full-time continuous service. And I said, we don't have anything like that in your handbook. And I go, oh, well, you should, because if you don't, they can just dismiss you, even if you have tenure. What those due process protections boil down to, and as the slide says, there are 16 different provisions in Regulation 5. The most basic are these two. You're entitled to a hearing before an elected faculty committee, an adjudicative hearing of record before an elected faculty committee. It specifies those words. And in that hearing, as it says, the burden of proof is on the administration for demonstrating cause for why it's trying to dismiss you. You're entitled to a whole lot of other things too, even before it gets to that, like a pre-termination hearing before an elected faculty committee. But these two are the essentials. If those are not in your handbook or contract, your institution has tenure in name only.
So with these, and I know there's differences between public and private institutions, would you also agree that the faculty member have representation with them, or is a hearing before the faculty, does that mean you wouldn't have either a legal or a union rep?
Oh, no, you can have. I'll tell you what you can have. During the proceedings, this is Regulation 5C5. During the proceedings, the faculty member will be permitted to have an academic advisor and counsel of the faculty member's choice. 5C6, at the request of either party or the hearing committee, a representative of a responsible educational association, hint, hint, will be permitted to attend the proceedings as an observer.
A lot of faculty don't know that.
Yeah, they should be informed somehow because that's what you're entitled to under Regulation 5C. And in fact, we maybe 4 or 5 times a year we're contacted by a faculty member who's facing dismissal, asking if we can send an AAUP representative to observe the proceedings. And then they write a confidential report to us to say either, yeah, it comported perfectly with what's in Regulation 5, or this thing was a train wreck and then we have to get involved. I really can't emphasize that middle portion enough. Tenure cannot be separated from the due process protections that attach to it. Without them, tenure doesn't exist. This is tenure. These two things, that's tenure in practice. 4C and 4D. So under AAUP standards, there are only 3 bases. Only 3. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Don't let the administration tell you, well, it's not banned to do this other. There's only 3. Adequate cause, which is typically related to professional incompetence, professional ethics, some gross misconduct, things like that. And then bona fide financial exigency, that's 4C, and program discontinuance for educational reasons, that's 4D. 4C and D are both trying to do the same thing, just in different situations. 4C is trying to prevent the administration from firing tenured faculty for bogus financial reasons. Oh, we have a financial crisis. We have a financial downturn. We have financial issues. Excuse me. That's not good enough. It needs to be a bona fide financial exigency as we define it, which will be a couple slides from now. Pardon me. 4D does the same thing, tries to prevent the same thing for bogus educational reasons. Oh, your department has, the majors in your department have declined for 2 years in a row, so we have to dismiss you. No. So 4C, both 4C and 4D are essentially 2 sets of standards. The first set of standards in each is related to the collective role that the faculty plays in decision-making. In this case, the faculty needs to have a meaningful role even in the determination that there's financial exigency, a condition of financial exigency. The administration doesn't get to just announce it, and the faculty has to say, oh, okay. The faculty is supposed to be involved in making the determination that there's one. The faculty should have access to all the same budget stuff, budget information that the administration has, whether it's through an elected committee or the Senate or whoever. And then the other part is this other set of standards is to ensure that the faculty members who are being dismissed in the name of financial exigency have some due process protections in place. In the case of 4C and 4D, the opportunity to contest the decision with an elected faculty committee. 4C defines financial exigency as this: severe financial crisis that fundamentally compromises the academic integrity of the institution as a whole and cannot be alleviated by less drastic means than terminating tenured appointments or appointments before the end of their specified term. 4C requires, among other due process safeguards, that the institution make every effort to find another suitable position, that should be in quotation marks too, for affected faculty members. So you may have heard the latest mass layoffs that we've been made aware of are at St. Norbert College in Wisconsin. They eliminated, I think, almost 30 tenured faculty members. And we opened a case there for 4 of them. And one of them reported to me last week or the week before that far from offering her another suitable position at the college, she's a tenured professor with 20 plus years of service there. On the list of other positions that would be available to her were part-time barista, dining hall worker, and what was the third one? Something else that was not another suitable position for a tenured faculty member. We hadn't seen anything like that before. That is not consistent with this. And then severance pay of at least 1 year for tenured faculty members or probationary members who have been there for 3 years or more. And then the severance pay decreases with less time at the institution. Those are just two of the. Again, I tried to focus this on the most important things to try and get incorporated into your contract or faculty handbook. These are among them for 4C.
The severance pay strikes me as something that would go into contract or for us it would be memo of understanding, whereas the other parts of it maybe would go into the handbook. So do you recommend splitting those or keeping them together?
I would probably keep them together and, again, replicate it, across both if you can. But if worse comes to worse and they're separated, as long as it says somewhere that you get this and you get this, even if that's in two different places, I think it's okay. But to my own way of thinking, it's probably better to have them together. Yeah. 4D, same thing. 4D, the standards set forth in 4D attempt to ensure that the faculty has a collective, meaningful role to play in the elimination of programs. And I should say, the establishment of program. This isn't what 4D is about, but establishing programs, downsizing programs, right-sizing programs, merging departments. Faculty should have a meaningful role in that. Those things too. And again, that affected faculty members have the opportunity to contest the decision with an elected faculty committee. More specifically, the decision to discontinue formally a program or department of instruction will be based essentially upon educational considerations as determined primarily by the faculty as a whole or an appropriate committee thereof. It goes back to the statement on government. That's an area of primary responsibility for the faculty. So of course they should have primary responsibility for determining to discontinue a program or establish a new one or merge two. Educational considerations, this is another critical part of 4D, do not include cyclical or temporary variations in enrollment. They must instead reflect long-range judgments that the educational mission of the institution as a whole will be enhanced by the discontinuance. Again, enrollment in your department courses has declined for 2 years in a row, so we're going to close you down. No, that's the definition of cyclical or temporary variation in enrollment. That is not a legitimate basis for discontinuing an academic program or department. Yes, please.
So all of this makes me think I need to go and read our handbook and our faculty handbook and our employee handbook billing journey. But that aside, my guess is that sentence, educational considerations do not include temporary variations in enrollment, probably isn't in there, knowing our institution. So if it is not in there, is there any kind of sort of legal precedent for, cases that have come up that would show that this should, by common sense, be adapted?
Unfortunately, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know about legal cases or legal precedent. What I do know is, to speak to what you said first, it's not overly common that this level of detail is included in an institution's regulations on program discontinuance. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to get it in there, but we don't. A lot of institutions have something close to 4C and something close to 4D. A lot of institutions have something it's just a mess. It's this ugly single policy that smashed the two together. And then we have to try and separate them when a faculty member asks. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not in there. this is the old, I mean, this has been going on for some time where the administration simply says, well, enrollment's down in your program, so we're discontinuing you. There were a number of institutions in our special governance investigation on COVID and governance back in 2021 that did this same thing. And it's not permissible under our standards. So finally, the fourth and last statement that I'll talk about is on procedural standards in the renewal or non-renewal of faculty appointments. This statement applies to all faculty on full-time renewable term appointments. All, not just tenure track. All full-time faculty who aren't tenured, basically. This applies to all of them. And the statement elaborates on procedural rights that are articulated in Regulations 2 and 10 of the Recommended Institutional Regulations. And those regulations are great and detailed. But this statement actually provides some rationale for why those standards are in there and some context for it. The purpose is to protect academic freedom for those colleagues who don't have tenure yet, full-time colleagues who don't have tenure yet. So what are they entitled to? 3 things, essentially. A written statement of the reasons for the non-renewal, if requested. And by the way, non-renewal includes tenure denial. So if you're denied tenure or you're not renewed from the first to the second year, the second to the third, or all the way up to the 7th, you're entitled to a written statement of reasons for the decision if you ask for it. Kind of hard to make an appeal if you don't know the reasons why it happened. Timely notice of non-renewal based on length of service. Again, if you're in your first year and you get non-renewed, you're entitled to 3 months. If you're in your second year and you get non-renewed, you're entitled to 6 months. And if you're in your third year or beyond and not renewed, you're entitled to a year of notice under our standards. And most importantly, and I know this, I sound like a broken record now, an opportunity to contest the decision with an elected faculty body. If the affected faculty member is alleging either inadequate consideration, like a procedural violation, academic freedom violation, or discrimination, you're entitled to petition an elected faculty committee with your appeal on any of those 3 grounds.
Can I ask you a question about the written statement? So, there must be institutions where this is actually the case.
Yes.
I don't know of anywhere, like a decision made by the Board of Governors or Trustees or the President above the elected faculty committees handling that tenure case or a renewal case produces a written statement for non-renewal. And I've always been interested in this because obviously they won't avoid a lawsuit, so then there's nothing written unless he gets above faculty committees to the record. Successful efforts to get the requirement for a written statement.
Actually, in my experience on the staff, it's much more common for this to be part of the non-renewal process than for it not to be. So it's rare when we see in institutions regulations and all they say is, yeah, you get timely notice, and that's it. Most places, let me qualify that. Most reputable institutions. And I don't, yeah, I mean, no, I don't say, I don't,
No, like even ours, which I don't think we have a very strong faculty handbook in Sacred Card, but I'm pretty sure there's something in there. That thing is in this procedure. Somebody says like you're entitled to stating the reasons if you request it.
Yeah, that's it.
Just gonna
That's
put in paper, but I'll double check and see what's there already.
Yeah, definitely double check. And I like the comment earlier about, I have to go back and reread my faculty handbook. You'll be surprised what you find and what you don't find, because it's not like a novel that you sit down and read for pleasure, but it's important to know what's in there and what's not, because that's what dictates the terms of your position on campus. I was going to say something else. Actually, I have an open case right now at an institution in Mississippi that doesn't afford anything like this. And a faculty member in his first year, he got literally a 2-sentence letter from the dean that says, This is to notify you you're not being reappointed for next year. Thank you for your service to the university. And so our case letter, he says, we don't get any of this stuff. So our case letter says, here's what this faculty member is entitled to. Just give it to him. Like, how can you say anything resembling academic freedom or due process exists at your institution of higher education if, like, basic due process protections aren't in there? So again, in rank order, try and get the whole statement on procedural standards in there if you can. It's exceedingly rare that we see that. The basic standards on the previous slide, at least get those in there, written reasons, timely notice, and an opportunity to appeal to a faculty committee applied to all full-time faculty members who don't have tenure. And then least preferential is the same thing applied only to all tenure track faculty members, especially with the proliferation of non-tenure track renewable appointments. It's just as important to protect those full-time colleagues as tenure track colleagues. And we have seen instances of handbooks that only extend those basic rights to faculty members going up for tenure. In that year, they have those rights, but in all the previous years of renewal, they don't. Not acceptable for us. Thanks for bearing with me. That was a lot to jam in, and I apologize if it was overwhelming, like I said, in the weeds. These are live links. I'm not sure who I can share this presentation with. When I do these presentations on camp for a chapter, I just share it with the president and they send it to whoever they'd like. I'm not sure who to send these to, but I'll send it to somebody.
Whoa.
I'll send it to Flo. Okay.
You ready?
I'll send it to Flo and I'll send it to Afshan too. Please.
Question. Something that's been happening at my university is that
We've started hiring staff, but pretending that they're faculty. So they are, they report to administrators. They're evaluated by administrators. They never have any review by other faculty members, but, you wouldn't be able to tell in the room who is staff and who is a faculty member. And I've taken this issue on. And I can't see to get much traction in terms of that. And it's because of, I think, something you said earlier, which was that a faculty member is a faculty member if they do teaching, research, and service. And so they're sort of pointing to this, how could you be so mean to these people just because they're not tenure track? And that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say, you are watering down tenure and you're taking away academic freedom because actually, when you call them staff, our SCM, our faculty policy manual, only applies to faculty. And so technically, they don't necessarily have any protections at all. And that's the face I make constantly. And so I'm curious for your input.
You can probably guess what I'm going to say by this point, by my face. So these staff members, do they teach?
they are primarily directors of graduate programs,
I see.
but they do also teach
Do they teach like a course a semester?
a course here and there. But to me, their duties are primarily administrative.
That's certainly what it sounds like. And so, no, they should not be considered as having faculty status.
Good argument.
Just what I read earlier from the joint statement on librarians. And then, the danger is, and I know of this on at least one other campus too, you get accused of being like exclusionary.
Yeah.
Yeah, elitist. It's these tenured faculty members who are elitist. They come to campus 2 or 3 times a week. We're here every day. What it demonstrates is a fundamental misunderstanding of the proper role of a faculty member on campus versus a staff member versus an administrative officer. Like, everybody has different roles. It's not all like one big happy family, and shouldn't be. As a faculty member, you have the role and responsibility, the duty to teach, to do research, and to serve. Those are very different responsibilities, it sounds like, and I'm kind of inferring, from one of these directors. That's
Managing the department.
Right. I mean, it is functionally an administrative position, a managerial position, it sounds like. And I guess that would be the crux of my argument if I were. Please.
Just a quick follow-up question. The statement on librarians that you've been referencing, do you remember when was that listed?
Somewhat embarrassingly, I do not remember because my memory is not what it should be, but I can tell you.
My reason for asking is I'm wondering if the AAUP should be thinking about updating it with a new statement that is addressing the sense of what's happened in the last 25 years in terms of the weird hybridizations and attempts to make introns around what actually constitutes faculty.
There has been discussion over the year, even before I joined the staff and was just, a member and on the council and at the state level and my chapter level, there's been discussion on and off of trying to elaborate on what's in the joint statement on librarians. But every time it gets started, people realize, well, this is what it boils down to. Like, what do you do all day? And so this text has been revised a few times. The last time it was revised was in 2012. And this is a joint statement of the AUP and the Association of College and Research Libraries. But maybe it is time. I mean, the proliferation you alluded to of all these different positions, and we get the question fairly frequently, here's this person on my campus, here's what they do. Is this person a faculty member? And we always just come back to these two sentences. Like, do they teach? Do they do research? On those campuses where librarians do have faculty status, it's because they do those things. And that applies to staff too.
Yeah, I mean, I found that I can't remember now at UConn the librarians are in AEP or the administrators, but we have coaches in the AEP, and it's pretty much from the origin of the chapter, and it was argued that they and however much we know that there's like television rights and these national titles and things like that, but a lot of the coaching staff they do as work that is analogous to teaching, and many of them are vulnerable in their like kind of on temporary contracts, et cetera, et cetera. So it actually has been fortunate for them to have access to cake. Now, I don't know how other universities would view it. There might have been a different union for them in the past, but we're keeping them in there.
Yeah, I'm not sure how. I do know of one small college in the state where coaches essentially have faculty rights.
It's considered a type of faculty, yeah. But there's all kinds of conditioning coaches, therapy, so
Yeah.
it's a big category.
Yeah, and what's causing some chaos at this institution I'm aware of is that the coaches are considered faculty. Like they can even run for faculty senate committees, including the executive committee, but at the same time they have their own handbook. So now the question is, well, what applies to them? Like if one of them gets dismissed, which handbook apply? Are they yeah.
I have a precedent that it would become due process in the AAUP contract that he won. And
I was an undergraduate at UConn at the same time as Kevin Ollie, actually.
So I wanted also just to ask about this proliferation of non-tangent track positions, and obviously I'm not even a full-time position, and Anton, which is awful, even though we're covered in the AP. But what I think is a problem is that a lot of large universities, including UConn, is the whole Connecticut state system, where I also used to teach, but I got booted because they just closed a whole bunch of programs arbitrarily. But it's like there isn't a real plan. Like, how did we move these tenure track lines? And we created full-time non-tenure track positions. At the University of Connecticut, they do have a kind of renewal process, and they are trying to protect their people, but it would be better if it were tenure, And what I'm saying is that then does the national AAUP have a way to address the fact that universities don't even seem to have a plan? Like suddenly it's most of the writing program, or a lot of the writing program in English program is now tenure track renewable. Was that a plan? How does that help a major? So it
I mean,
seems like a Wild West here, where tenure's just being eroded.
oh yeah, and it's been going on for probably 4 decades, going on 4 decades now. We've just seen the gradual erosion. I mean, we're to the point now where more than 3/4 of faculty positions in this country are not on the tenure track. Whether they're part-time or full-time, they have no opportunity to ever get tenure. No, I wouldn't say that. What I would say,
It's a luxury. For the kids for the kids coming to have, it's like for the people, like my son, wants to be a professor. I said, I don't think so.
yeah,
You know,
it's yeah, I don't disagree.
yeah.
Um, no, it shouldn't. I mean, especially if we want a robust sense of academic freedom on campuses. And to this day, the AUP still only recognizes 2 types of faculty appointments: probationary for tenure and tenured. Again, if you don't have a tenure system, we don't care. You're either probationary if you're there less than 7 years, or you have tenure from our perspective if you're there for more than 7 full time. These are links to these are live links. They should work when I send this to Flow. And I'll take your question. I apologize. I just want to get this out there. If you ever have questions about AUP policy or anything in the Red Book or about this presentation, this is our department email address. The 5 of us all check this regularly. We each have our own email addresses too. Mine's just mdecesar at AUP. At Merrimack. mdecesar at AUP.org. Feel free to write anytime. And please, thanks for your patience. Oh, no, we have one question left.
So my question was, you mentioned 1915, code 1940, but my impression has been that 40 years or so, colleges have all switched to this business model. And it seems like the Red Book is from before colleges switched to the business model. So, I mean, I'm on board with everything here, but I thought you might say something that the times have changed since 1940.
The times have certainly changed, but what hasn't changed from our perspective is the professional standards that we should adhere to and that administration should adhere to. So, we heard 10 years ago or so, we heard from administrators were all on this kick. They must have gotten at some administrator conference somewhere that the statement on government was outdated because we need, what was the term back there? We need to be nimble. We need to make nimble decisions, and we need to be flexible and whatever the hell else.
Well, our provost is always leaning on the date. Well, 1940.
Yes, it has stood the test of time since 1940. The principles have not changed, and I would argue shouldn't change.
I think everyone didn't agree that we're fighting
With-
cut the right?
Who come from the business world. Yeah. It often feels like an eternally losing battle, but it's worth it, I think. I found as a faculty member was worth it. Even if you can make small changes, to see the effect on faculty's working conditions was more important than any paper I ever published that was read by 4 people somewhere. To make concrete changes on campus is fulfilling, or it was for me. But I do appreciate what you're saying for sure. Thank you, everyone.